It was a typical Friday night at Elon's Table, a sleek, high-end restaurant nestled in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. The hum of conversations filled the air, punctuated by the clinking of glasses and the soft jazz playing in the background. The smell of fresh, expertly prepared dishes wafted through the space, mingling with the soft glow of warm, industrial lighting. It looked like any other night at the upscale eatery, a place where Silicon Valley elites and A-list celebrities alike came to dine in style. But tonight, something was different. As the waitstaff hustled around the open kitchen, serving plates to eager customers, the door to the restaurant creaked open. At first, no one paid much attention. This was, after all, a bustling Friday evening with guests coming and going. But then a man walked in, dressed in a simple hoodie and baseball cap, with the air of someone who preferred not to be noticed. Most patrons would have been too distracted by the glitzy atmosphere to give a second glance, but something about this man caught Sarah's attention. Sarah Thompson, a young waitress at Elon's Table, was hurrying to clear a table near the entrance when she noticed the man. She had worked here for almost 2 years and had seen all kinds of customers, some regulars, some new faces, but this man stood out. There was something oddly familiar about him. He moved with an almost effortless confidence, but his presence was subdued, like he wanted to slip in unnoticed. She went back to her duties, trying to ignore the feeling creeping up her spine that this was no ordinary diner. As she passed him, she could hear a faint sigh escape his lips, as if he were trying to catch his breath. But before she could think more about it, her attention was grabbed by something far more jarring, a muffled sound, coming from the kitchen. It wasn't the typical clatter of pots and pans, nor the chatter of chefs. No. This was something much more unsettling. A soft sob. Her heart skipped a beat. Sarah had worked in this restaurant long enough to know that emotions weren't usually displayed openly here. The staff were professionals, each going about their business with precision. But this was different. She instinctively turned toward the sound, her eyes scanning the area. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, she could just make out a figure hunched over near the back counter. It was one of the cooks, a young woman named Ella, who had been with the restaurant for several months. The tears were flowing freely now, though Ella was doing her best to stifle the sound, her face buried in her hands. Sarah froze. She hadn't seen Ella cry before. In fact, Ella had always been the calm one, the type who kept her emotions hidden beneath a tough exterior. She was known for her efficiency in the kitchen, her sharp focus on making perfect dishes every time. But now, Sarah was faced with a side of Ella she didn't recognize, vulnerable, broken, human. For a moment, Sarah stood there, torn. She had seen many of her coworkers go through their own struggles that were often invisible to the customers. They all wore the same stoic masks, pretending everything was fine. But this was different. The way Ella's shoulders trembled with each sob, the rawness of her emotion, it made Sarah feel like she was witnessing something private, something she wasn't supposed to see. Sarah's first instinct was to go to her. To reach out, offer comfort. But she hesitated. She was just a waitress, after all. What could she possibly say? Would Ella even want to talk about whatever was troubling her? As Sarah stood frozen, unsure of what to do, the man in the hoodie, the one who had caught her eye earlier, moved past her, stepping lightly toward the kitchen. A strange thought crossed her mind. What if he's someone important? Her pulse quickened. She hadn't realized until now how different he looked from the usual diners. There was something about him, something that was making her feel uneasy, like he was part of a world she didn't quite understand. Without a word, the man slipped into the kitchen, his footsteps barely audible. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then followed, curiosity getting the better of her. The kitchen was a world of organized chaos, the chefs working with fluid precision to prepare meals that would soon be plated and sent to eager customers. But in the back corner, the air was thick with tension, as Ella continued to quietly sob. Then, to Sarah's surprise, the man walked straight up to her. "Hey," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Is she okay?" Sarah stared at him. She was about to ask who he was, but something in his tone made her pause. There was a quiet authority in his voice that seemed to put her at ease. Maybe it was the way he asked the question, with genuine concern. I don't know," Sarah replied hesitantly. "She's usually fine, but this is different." The man glanced over at Ella, his eyes narrowing slightly. For a brief moment, he looked like he was deep in thought. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude," he said, his words almost apologetic. Then, without another word, he turned to leave the kitchen. But Sarah couldn't let him go. Something about the situation felt wrong. She had to know who this man was. "Wait," she called out, her voice more urgent than she intended. The man stopped in his tracks, turning to face her. Sarah swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the ridiculousness of what she was about to ask. "Do you work here?" she blurted out. The man paused, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips, before he spoke again. "I guess you could say that." His response only made Sarah more confused. She watched as he exited the kitchen and moved toward the back of the restaurant, disappearing into the dining area. Sarah stood frozen in place for a moment, her mind racing. Was he? Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be? She looked at Ella, still sitting in the corner, trying to compose herself. For some reason, Sarah felt as if her world had just shifted slightly, as though she had unknowingly stepped into a situation much bigger than she could have anticipated. As the man disappeared from sight, Sarah's thoughts swirled in a dizzying frenzy. What did he know? And what did it mean for her? But before she could answer those questions, another thought came to mind. One that caused a chill to run down her spine. What was this man really doing here? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah stood still, her mind racing. She was used to unusual situations in the restaurant. After all, it was no secret that Elon's table attracted its fair share of eccentric customers. But this was something different. The man in the hoodie, who had come and gone so quickly, felt almost like a shadow in the night, but the weight of his presence lingered in the air. She glanced back at Ella, still hunched over, her body trembling with sobs that she couldn't seem to control. Sarah's heart ached for her, but she couldn't help the growing curiosity about the mysterious man who had briefly walked into her world. There was something about him, his calm demeanor, the way he seemed so detached from everything around him, yet still genuinely concerned for Ella. He didn't seem like the typical high-profile guest who would casually drop into a restaurant like this. No, there was a certain gravity about him that Sarah couldn't ignore. As Ella finally managed to compose herself, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, Sarah decided she needed to find out more about this mysterious visitor. A few minutes later, Sarah's break arrived. She grabbed her phone from her locker and decided to do some quick research. She had to know who that man was. She quickly typed in Elon's table owner into the search engine, fully expecting to find articles about the restaurant's world-class reputation and its renowned chef. But instead, what she found made her stomach drop. Elon Musk. The name jumped out at her like a bolt of lightning. Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, and countless other ventures, was the owner of the restaurant. The man who had just walked in was none other than Elon Musk himself. Her heart raced. It made sense now, in an odd way. The way he carried himself, the sense of quiet power, the way he seemed to be disconnected from the regular restaurant staff, it all pointed to him. But why had he been dressed so casually? Why had he kept a low profile, sneaking in without announcing his presence? More questions piled up in Sarah's mind, but there was no time to waste. She had to go back to work, and the only thing she could focus on was the question of why Elon Musk would show up at his own restaurant, under the radar, and act so strangely. Back in the main dining area, Elon Musk was seated at one of the corner tables, the very spot where he could observe the restaurant without drawing attention. The staff was busy, and no one seemed to recognize him. He blended in perfectly, almost invisible to the outside world. It was the kind of anonymity he longed for when he just needed to be a regular person for a change. Elon had grown tired of the constant media frenzy. People constantly speculated about his every move, and it had become exhausting. He missed the days when he could just walk into a place, sit down, and eat without people snapping photos or bombarding him with questions. That's why, tonight, he had decided to slip in unnoticed. He didn't need the spotlight, he needed a moment of peace. But what he hadn't anticipated was seeing something that caught him completely off guard. When he entered the kitchen and heard Ella crying, something stirred deep within him. He had been surrounded by all kinds of emotions in his life, anger, joy, frustration, and even moments of despair, but seeing a young woman like Ella, who had always been so composed, break down in front of him hit him harder than he expected. It reminded him of the pressures his own employees often faced. Sure, he ran massive companies, but the people who worked for him were just as human, just as vulnerable. Somewhere along the way, he'd gotten lost in the day-to-day grind of his ventures and had forgotten how difficult things could get for those closest to him. Elon took a deep breath and leaned back in his seat. He needed to think. He had always prided himself on being a visionary, a problem solver. But now, he found himself facing an entirely new problem: how to be a leader who cared about more than just business. How to truly connect with the people who made his ventures a reality. Sarah made her way back into the dining room, her mind still reeling from the revelation. She had learned that Elon Musk, the owner of the restaurant, had been quietly observing his business from the shadows, trying to understand the real dynamics at play. But what did this mean for her? For Ella? She glanced over at the kitchen door, wondering what had transpired behind the scenes. Ella had stopped crying for now, but Sarah could see the lingering sadness in her eyes. She needed to know what was going on. She needed to understand why Ella, the quiet and efficient cook, had been so visibly upset. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted when her manager, Tom, walked up to her. He was an efficient, no-nonsense kind of guy, always focused on the bottom line. "Sarah," he said, "can you go check on table 8? The customers are asking for more wine." "Sure," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions she was feeling. She gave one last glance toward the kitchen before walking off to attend to her tables. Back at the table, Elon had finished his meal, but his mind was still on Ella. He had learned a lot about himself tonight just by observing. The truth was, the restaurant had always been more of an experiment for him, a way to challenge himself and his team. But now, it seemed that this little corner of his empire might be telling him something more about the human side of leadership. As he prepared to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that the restaurant was missing something. Was it just the food that made it special, or was it the people, the ones who worked tirelessly in the kitchen and the ones who served the meals with a smile? He needed to make some changes, but how? What could he do to create a place where the employees felt seen and valued? Elon's mind buzzed with ideas, but before he could come to any conclusions, he heard a soft voice calling out from across the room. It was Sarah. "Mr. Musk?" He turned, his heart racing. He hadn't expected anyone to recognize him. Sarah was standing there, looking somewhat uncertain but determined. "Yes," Elon replied, his voice calm. He wasn't sure how to respond. What was she going to say? Did she know who he was? Was she going to call him out? I just wanted to thank you," Sarah said, her voice a bit shaky. "For coming in tonight. For checking on Ella." Elon's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Ella?" he asked, his mind still trying to process everything. "Yeah. She's been having a rough time lately, and, well, I think your presence tonight really helped her. I didn't expect it, but you seem to really care." Elon didn't know what to say at first. His mind was still processing everything, his own emotional reaction to Ella's pain, the way Sarah was talking to him now, the weight of his responsibility not only as an owner but as someone who could influence the lives of the people around him. After a long pause, he simply nodded. I just wanted to make sure she was okay. We're all human, after all. Sarah smiled, a bit of relief washing over her. Thank you. I think you made a difference tonight. Elon stood, ready to leave, but as he moved past Sarah, he paused for a moment and turned back to her. You're welcome. But don't forget, sometimes the real work isn't just about making money. It's about making sure the people around you are okay. Sarah watched him leave, her thoughts swirling. There was something deeper going on here. Something bigger than just a simple visit from a rich, powerful man. Something had shifted. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah wondered if this could be the beginning of something new, not just for Ella, but for herself, too. She had no idea yet, but her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. The days following Elon's surprise visit to Elon's table were strangely quiet. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. In the time she'd worked at the restaurant, she had never experienced a moment like that, when someone so powerful and famous showed such genuine care for someone so ordinary. Ella, the cook, had been the center of attention for a brief moment, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed for her too. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that, like Ella, she too had been living her life beneath a mask. She had always kept her emotions carefully guarded, just like most of the people she worked with. Every day felt like a performance, always smiling, always staying in control, always trying to give the impression that everything was perfect. But now, after seeing Elon Musk's rare display of empathy, she wondered if it was possible to let her guard down. Could she allow herself to be vulnerable without feeling exposed? Could the place she worked, a bustling restaurant, become more than just a job but also a place where she and her co-workers could be seen for who they truly were? Ella, however, was a different story. She hadn't returned to her usual self since that night. Sarah saw the same distant look in Ella's eyes that had been there after the sobs had subsided. She was still quiet, still efficient in the kitchen, but Sarah could feel the weight of whatever was troubling her hanging in the air. That Friday afternoon, Sarah found herself standing outside the kitchen, eyeing Ella as she worked. She noticed how tightly Ella's lips were pressed together, as though the kitchen was her only safe space to hide away from the world. Sarah knew Ella had been through a lot in the past few months, and this recent breakdown was just the latest in a series of cracks that were beginning to show. Hey, Sarah called softly, crossing into the kitchen and leaning against the counter. You doing all right? Ella paused in her chopping, glancing at Sarah with a quiet nod. But her eyes didn't quite match her words. She was holding something back, something Sarah could feel but couldn't touch. I'm fine, Ella said, her voice flat. She picked up the knife again and continued to slice vegetables with mechanical precision. Sarah hesitated. She wanted to say more, to ask about the pain she could see hiding behind Ella's calm facade, but she wasn't sure how to begin. She had always respected Ella's privacy, her quiet strength, but now something felt different. It's okay if you're not, Sarah said, her voice softer. You know, you don't have to pretend everything's okay. Ella stopped chopping and turned to face her. Her expression softened, just a little, and Sarah saw a flicker of something, maybe gratitude, or maybe just the need to be understood. I appreciate it, but you don't need to worry about me, Ella said, the words coming out like a sigh. I'll be fine. It's just been a rough time lately. Sarah nodded, not pressing the issue. She understood that Ella wasn't ready to open up, and that was okay. But she couldn't help but wonder what had happened to cause the cracks in Ella's otherwise calm exterior. What was she going through that had left her feeling so broken? Later that evening, as the dinner rush began, Sarah found herself back at her station, busy taking orders and ensuring that the guests were happy. She moved through the restaurant with the grace of someone who had perfected the dance of waiting tables, but her mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Ella. She wondered if there was more she could do to help her, or if she was just another person who was too afraid to dig deeper into someone's pain. As she was clearing a table, a voice from behind startled her. "You know, you're doing a great job here." She turned around to see a familiar face, Elon Musk, back again, this time without the hoodie and baseball cap, dressed in a sharp black suit. His presence was still understated, but unmistakable. Despite the sophisticated look, he somehow still seemed to blend in with the background, just another businessman in a sea of affluent diners. Sarah had to remind herself to breathe. It wasn't often that a billionaire casually walked up to you and gave you a compliment, and in that moment, it felt surreal. "Mr. Musk," she said, offering a polite smile. "Thanks. I'm just doing my job." He smiled back, a rare expression of warmth. "I can see that. But you do it with something more, something a lot of people miss. You care." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had never considered herself the type to stand out, but hearing Elon Musk say that, it felt like recognition in a way she had never imagined. She had always felt like just another waitress, blending in with the rest of the staff, but hearing him speak like that made her feel like she actually mattered. I appreciate that," she said, the words coming out more quietly than she intended. Elon nodded. "You know, I've been thinking about what happened the other night. With Ella. It made me realize that sometimes, we all get so caught up in the big picture that we forget the little things, the people who make it all happen." Sarah blinked in surprise. You really do care about the people who work here, don't you?" He paused for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "I do. I think it's easy for people like me to forget that the real value of any business is the people who keep it running. The ones who aren't in the spotlight. But without them, we wouldn't be anything." The sincerity in his voice caught Sarah off guard. She had never really stopped to think about it, but now that Elon had said it, she couldn't help but wonder how often this kind of thinking went unnoticed. People in the restaurant world, the people who worked behind the scenes, were often taken for granted. But Elon, despite his wealth and fame, seemed to understand the importance of the individuals who made it all work. She thought back to the tension she had felt earlier with Ella, the way the walls had been closing in on her and the others. She realized that Elon's unexpected visit, his quiet empathy, had struck a chord within her. Maybe there was more to this restaurant, and to life, than just following the routine and pretending everything was fine. "I think you've got a point," Sarah said, the words coming out with a new sense of purpose. "We all play a role, no matter how big or small." Elon gave her a small smile. "Exactly. And sometimes, it's the little things that make all the difference." Just then, the door to the kitchen swung open, and Sarah's attention was drawn back to Ella. She was standing there, looking as though she were about to go back to work, but her eyes were softer, less guarded. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Sarah saw something new there, a flicker of hope. It was a small step, but it was a step. Maybe things were starting to shift, not just for Ella, but for everyone. Maybe this unexpected connection with Elon was the spark they needed to start seeing one another more clearly, outside the roles they had always played. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a glimmer of possibility, as if the walls that had once kept her distant from others were finally beginning to crumble. The days that followed Elon's quiet visit were a whirlwind for Sarah. Work was busier than usual, and she found herself distracted. The fleeting moments she shared with Elon lingered in her thoughts, pulling at her attention whenever she had a free minute. She hadn't expected the brief encounter to affect her so deeply, but it had. There was something in the way he carried himself, something in the genuine care he had shown not just for Ella but for the unseen people who kept the restaurant running. It made Sarah rethink her place in the world, not just at Elon's table, but in her own life. At the start of every shift, she would slip into her uniform and set her intentions. Just get through the day. Smile. Serve. Make small talk. But each time she tried to shut the door on those thoughts, they pushed back harder. There was something bigger happening, something she couldn't shake off. And then there was Ella. Sarah noticed a subtle shift in her coworker over the past few days. After the tears had stopped flowing, Ella had retreated even further into herself, though the cold distance had started to soften just a little. She was still quiet, still meticulous with her cooking, but there was a flicker of openness that hadn't been there before. That afternoon, during a rare moment when the kitchen was quieter than usual, Sarah found herself standing at the doorway, watching Ella prepare the evening specials. The hum of the kitchen was familiar, comforting even. But today, the air between them felt different. It was heavier, like they were both waiting for something to break the silence that had lingered for too long. "Ella," Sarah called softly, stepping into the kitchen. Her voice was hesitant, unsure of what she was about to say, but the need to reach out was stronger than her fear of crossing a boundary. Ella didn't look up immediately, her hands still working as if they were on autopilot. But after a beat, she glanced over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing in that way they always did when she was trying to figure out what Sarah wanted. "What is it?" Ella's voice was a little less cold than usual, and Sarah took that as an opening. "I just wanted to check in on you," Sarah said, her heart hammering a little faster than she anticipated. "I know things have been tough lately, and I don't know. I just wanted to let you know that I'm here if you need to talk." Ella's face softened, and for the briefest moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of something: vulnerability? Sadness? Whatever it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I appreciate that," Ella said quietly, her focus returning to the task at hand. "But there's nothing to talk about. It's just been a hard time. I'll get through it." Sarah stood there, her heart aching for the woman who had always seemed so composed, so impenetrable. She knew better than to push, so she simply nodded and said, "Well, I'm still here. If you change your mind." With that, Sarah turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she heard Ella's soft voice call out behind her. "Thank you, Sarah." The words were simple, but they meant more than they seemed. Sarah paused, her hand on the doorframe, and glanced back at her friend. Ella was still working, but now there was a warmth in her eyes, a glimmer of recognition, of understanding. That evening, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, not just between her and Ella, but within herself. It had been a long time since she had allowed herself to be open with someone, especially someone she worked alongside every day. In the fast-paced world of Elon's table, there was little room for emotional connection beyond the professional boundaries. But now, she was beginning to realize how much she had been missing out on by keeping her distance. It wasn't just about the restaurant. It was about life. About letting people in. About being real with one another. After the dinner rush, as Sarah wiped down the tables and prepped for closing, she couldn't help but think back to Elon's visit. He had said something that stayed with her: sometimes, it's the little things that make all the difference. She had assumed he was talking about business, but now she realized he was talking about people. About taking the time to truly see the ones around you. Sarah wasn't sure how to apply that wisdom to her own life, but she was determined to try. Maybe that was the change she had been waiting for. The next day, something unexpected happened. Sarah was in the middle of a conversation with Tom, her manager, when she noticed a familiar face enter the restaurant. It wasn't a regular customer, and it wasn't any of the usual staff. It was Elon. But this time, he wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a simple t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers, completely different from the sleek, polished image she was used to seeing. The contrast was so stark that it made Sarah stop in her tracks. He looked like just another guy, like anyone else who had stepped into the restaurant for a meal. He wasn't here to observe the restaurant in his usual quiet manner. No, today, he was here as a guest. And as he walked past her, his eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, she felt like he saw through her. It was the same feeling she'd had the other night when he had complimented her, like he recognized something in her that no one else had noticed before. As he took a seat at one of the corner tables, Sarah noticed something else that surprised her. He wasn't alone. There was a woman with him, someone who appeared to be in her mid-30s, with long auburn hair and a quiet confidence that rivaled Elon's own. They were talking, but their conversation seemed muted from where Sarah stood. Whatever it was, it seemed deeply personal, as though they were discussing something that mattered more than just small talk. For the first time, Sarah felt a pang of curiosity about Elon. Who was this woman? Was this a partner, a friend, or someone from his private life? And why had he chosen Elon's table for what looked like a personal meeting? As Sarah continued to serve customers, she couldn't help but sneak glances at Elon and his guest. The quiet, almost deliberate nature of their conversation intrigued her. There was something about the way he spoke to her, the way he listened, that made Sarah feel like she was witnessing something rare, something beyond the business empire, the public persona, and the headlines. It was a glimpse into the real Elon Musk. Later, as the evening wound down and the last of the customers trickled out of the restaurant, Elon stood up to leave. He passed by Sarah, offering her a smile that was more genuine than anything he had shown before. "Thanks for the hospitality," he said, his voice warm but with an undercurrent of something deeper, something Sarah couldn't quite place. "We'll be back." Sarah watched him walk out of the door, the sound of his footsteps fading as he disappeared into the night. There was something about his visit today that felt different, more human. It was as if, just for a moment, he had allowed himself to be seen for who he really was. And as she watched the door close behind him, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if, maybe, that was the key to everything. To being real. To breaking the silence that had held everyone in place for so long. The restaurant had never felt more alive than it did the next day. Sarah couldn't explain it, but there was an undeniable shift in the air, something that lingered even as the usual rush of customers filled the dining room. Maybe it was because of Elon's unexpected visit the night before, or maybe it was the subtle change in the atmosphere as Ella had begun to open up, just a little. Either way, Sarah felt it. Something was changing, slowly but surely. Her mind couldn't help but wander back to the conversation she overheard between Elon and his guest. The woman who had been with him that night, Sarah couldn't shake the thought of her. There was a connection between them, something more personal than business, and it was a reminder that Elon was more than just the CEO, the billionaire, the headline. He was a man with his own secrets, his own struggles. As Sarah moved through her duties, serving tables and chatting with the guests, her thoughts kept drifting back to the larger questions, about life, about what it meant to really see people for who they were, not just for their titles or their appearances. What had Elon's quiet gestures taught her about vulnerability and connection? And what about Ella? Was she hiding something deeper, something that was preventing her from fully opening up? It was during the late afternoon lull that Sarah found herself standing by the window, watching the people outside bustle about in the city. The sun was starting to set, casting a golden glow over the streets, and she felt an odd sense of calm, despite everything that had been swirling in her mind. "Hey, you okay?" Sarah turned to see Tom, her manager, standing behind her, his brow furrowed in concern. He was always the first to notice when something was off with the staff, and today was no exception. "Yeah, I'm fine," Sarah replied, offering him a small smile. "Just thinking." Tom didn't look convinced, but he didn't press. Instead, he gave her a knowing nod. "I get it. It's been a weird week. A lot of changes, huh?" Sarah didn't answer right away, still caught in her thoughts. She had noticed the subtle tension in the restaurant recently. The energy had shifted, almost as though everyone was waiting for something to happen. And now, with Elon's mysterious visit, it felt like there was an undercurrent of curiosity and anticipation among the staff. "Yeah," Sarah finally said, turning away from the window. "It feels like something's coming. I just don't know what yet." Tom chuckled, but there was a hint of seriousness in his eyes. Well, whatever it is, we'll handle it. We always do. As Sarah nodded, her gaze drifted to the kitchen. There, she caught sight of Ella again, her back turned as she prepared for the evening's dinner rush. Something about the way she worked with such focused intensity made Sarah wonder, what was Ella hiding? Why couldn't she just let go of whatever it was that held her back? After a few moments, Sarah made up her mind. She needed to talk to Ella again. She needed to understand what had caused her to retreat into herself so completely. That evening, just before the dinner service began, Sarah made her way into the kitchen. Ella was wiping down the countertops, her hands moving mechanically as she cleaned. There was a slight tension in her posture, but she didn't acknowledge Sarah's presence immediately. Ella? Sarah called softly, stepping into the kitchen. Ella looked up from her work, her eyes briefly meeting Sarah's before quickly looking away. What's up? I just wanted to check in again, Sarah said, her voice tentative. You know, you don't have to go through whatever you're dealing with alone. Ella paused, her hand still gripping the rag. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Sarah could feel the wall between them, the invisible barrier that Ella had carefully built around herself. It wasn't something Sarah had ever experienced before, but she could feel the weight of it in the air. I'm fine, Ella said again, but this time, her voice was less convincing. It was quieter, almost defeated. Ella, Sarah said, stepping closer. Please, you don't have to keep hiding. I'm not going to push you, but if you ever want to talk. I'm here. Ella exhaled sharply, her shoulders slumping. For a moment, Sarah thought she would turn away again, but instead, Ella dropped the rag onto the counter and sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her head in her hands. Everything's falling apart, Ella whispered, her voice barely audible. And I don't know how to fix it. Sarah's heart broke at the raw vulnerability in Ella's voice. She had always known there was something more to Ella's quiet demeanor, something deeper than the stoic surface she projected. But she hadn't known just how much Ella had been carrying. You don't have to fix it alone, Sarah said gently, taking a seat beside her. You don't have to do any of this alone. Ella lifted her head, her eyes red from the tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed until now. It's my mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. She's been sick for months, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I couldn't tell anyone. I didn't want to be weak. Sarah's heart ached for her friend. She had no idea what it must have been like for Ella to keep something so heavy bottled up for so long. Ella, you're not weak, Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. You're human. And it's okay to be scared. It's okay to need help. Ella wiped at her eyes, sniffling as she struggled to regain composure. I've been trying to be strong for her, you know. For my mom. But I don't know if I can keep doing it. You don't have to do it alone, Sarah repeated softly. You've got people who care about you. Me, for one. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ella looked Sarah in the eye. Thank you, she whispered. Sarah smiled gently, her heart lightening just a little. Anytime. As the dinner rush began, Sarah felt a new sense of connection with her friend, with Ella. The weight of the silence had been broken, and now there was a small but meaningful crack in the armor Ella had built. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Sarah believe that, maybe, things were going to be okay. Just as the evening wore on, Sarah found herself feeling different, more open, more present. There was a shift happening inside of her, something that had been sparked by Elon's visit and fueled by her conversation with Ella. Maybe life wasn't about keeping up appearances, about pretending everything was fine. Maybe it was about allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to lean on others, and to give yourself permission to be real. As she worked through the night, Sarah found herself smiling more than she had in weeks. For the first time in a long time, she felt connected, to her coworkers, to the restaurant, to the world around her. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. The days following Ella's emotional revelation felt different, lighter somehow. It was as if the burden that had weighed her down had been partially lifted, and in its place was a sense of quiet relief. Sarah noticed the change in her. Ella was still distant at times, but there was less tension, less of that defensive wall that had kept everyone at arm's length. But even with Ella more open, there was still something Sarah couldn't shake. Something about Elon's visit continued to linger in her mind. The way he seemed to see her, really see her, had stuck with her more than she expected. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he acted, like he knew things, like he understood that people, not just systems or profits, were what really mattered. Elon's visit had also sparked something inside of Sarah. It was a strange mixture of awe and curiosity that led her to ask questions she hadn't even thought of before. How had someone like him, someone who changed the world with his ideas, become so human? The more she reflected on it, the more she realized how little she knew about him beyond the headlines. It was on one of those long shifts, with Sarah lost in her thoughts while prepping the bar area, that the door to the restaurant opened with a chime. Sarah's gaze flickered toward the entrance, and for a split second, her heart skipped a beat. It was Elon again. This time, he was alone. He looked different from the man who had come in the night before, less composed, perhaps, but still undeniably Elon. He wore a simple hoodie and jeans, his hands tucked into the pockets as he surveyed the room. There was no entourage, no attention-grabbing flair, just him, standing there as if he was deciding whether to take a seat or leave. And then, as if by instinct, he made his way to the same table by the window, the one he had occupied just days earlier. Sarah felt an inexplicable pull to approach him, as if something inside her was telling her to take a step closer, to bridge the distance between them. She wasn't sure why, but she did. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward his table with the same practiced ease she'd used when serving any other guest. When she reached him, she hesitated for only a moment before speaking. "Back again, huh?" she said with a smile, hoping her voice didn't betray the nerves creeping up on her. Elon looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. There was a warmth in his gaze, a recognition that surprised her. "Yeah, seems like it," he said with a chuckle. "I was in the neighborhood, and I thought I'd stop by." The casualness of his words threw Sarah off guard, but she quickly recovered. "Well, welcome back. It's good to see you again." For a moment, neither of them said anything. Sarah wasn't sure why she had approached him, it wasn't like he needed anything special. He was just a guest, after all. But something about the way he carried himself, the air of quiet authority mixed with genuine curiosity, made her feel like they were talking as equals rather than as a famous entrepreneur and a restaurant worker. "What brings you here this time?" Sarah asked, leaning slightly against the edge of the table. Elon glanced down, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I guess you could say I'm searching for inspiration. Thought I'd visit a place with a good vibe. The last time I was here, I saw something different." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "I guess I'm still trying to figure it out." Sarah blinked, caught off guard. "You're looking for inspiration here," she repeated, a small laugh escaping her lips. "I never imagined you'd find it in a small restaurant like this." Elon's smile deepened, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't quite place. "You'd be surprised. Sometimes, the most valuable lessons come from the places you least expect. There's a lot to learn from ordinary people doing extraordinary things in their day-to-day lives." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Sarah had never really thought of herself as extraordinary, just someone doing her job, getting through the day, trying to make ends meet. But hearing Elon speak with such conviction made her question whether she had been selling herself short. "Is that why you're always watching?" Sarah asked, her voice quieter than she intended. "Is that what you're really after, seeing the people behind the masks?" Elon seemed to consider her question carefully. He didn't answer immediately, as though weighing the depth of her words. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. Something like that. I think, sometimes, people hide who they really are. They get lost in the roles they play, and it becomes hard to see them for who they truly are. Sarah stood still for a moment, taking in what he had said. There was something about his insight that resonated with her, something she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way he spoke, like he understood the complexities of life in ways most people never did. Or maybe it was the fact that he was here, sitting at the table like any other guest, and yet, there was something undeniably powerful about his presence. I get that, she said quietly. But it's hard, you know. We all have these roles we play, at work, with our families. Sometimes it feels like that's all we are, just pieces moving through a bigger system. Elon leaned forward slightly, as though he was more invested in the conversation now than before. I think the key is to remember that you don't have to be defined by your role. It's about finding balance. The trick is knowing who you are outside of those roles, beyond the expectations and pressures. And once you figure that out, that's when you start living life on your own terms. His words struck a chord deep within Sarah. She hadn't really thought about it that way before. She'd spent so much of her life following the script, work hard, keep your head down, don't make waves, that she had lost sight of the person she wanted to be, the person she was meant to become. For the first time, she began to feel that maybe it was time to step outside the box, to stop letting life happen to her and start taking control of her own narrative. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I needed to hear that. Elon smiled, the warmth in his eyes never fading. Anytime, Sarah. As he sat back, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the strange connection they had, two people from different worlds, but for some reason, their paths had crossed in this moment, and it felt significant. Before she turned to leave, Elon's voice stopped her. By the way, I never got your opinion on the food last time. What did you think? Sarah laughed softly, feeling a flicker of amusement. I thought it was great. But then again, I'm not the one making it. I'll leave the high-end critiques to the experts. Elon smiled, a mischievous glint in his eye. Maybe, but I'll take your word for it. We're all experts in something, aren't we? As Sarah turned to walk away, she couldn't help but smile to herself. There was something about Elon's approach, his unassuming manner and his ability to make her feel like she was important in this grand, chaotic world, that left her feeling lighter, as if the weight of uncertainty had lifted just a little. As she moved through the restaurant, serving the next round of customers, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of something new. She didn't know what it was, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was starting to see the bigger picture. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to take the first step. The days after her conversation with Elon were strange. Sarah couldn't quite shake the sense that something in her life was shifting, although she couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. It wasn't that her life had changed drastically, it hadn't. She was still working the same job, still serving the same customers, still getting lost in the whirlwind of everyday life. But there was something new in her thoughts, a flicker of possibility that hadn't been there before. It was during one of those quiet moments between shifts when Sarah found herself thinking about her life, her choices, and the things she had put off. How many times had she told herself she couldn't do something? How many dreams had she set aside because they didn't seem practical? In the past few days, Elon's words kept echoing in her head. You don't have to be defined by your role. It had struck her like a bolt of lightning, and for the first time, she realized how much she had been playing it safe, too safe. Later that week, Sarah was prepping the restaurant for the evening rush when a familiar voice called out from behind her. Hey, Sarah. She turned to see her old friend, Jessie, walking toward her. Jessie had been a regular at the restaurant for as long as Sarah could remember, but she hadn't come in for a while, not since she'd moved away to start her own business. Jessie. Wow, it's been ages. What are you doing here? Sarah said, her voice full of surprise. Jessie grinned, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "I was in town for a conference and thought I'd stop by to say hello. I've missed this place. And you?" Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth wash over her. Jessie had always been that person who made her feel like she could take on the world, even when everything seemed overwhelming. She was the type of person who knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't afraid to chase after it. "I've missed you too," Sarah said, giving Jessie a hug. "It's so good to see you. What's been going on? How's the business?" Jessie smiled proudly. "It's growing, slowly, but steadily. You know how it goes. But enough about me. What about you? How have you been? You seem different." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Jessie studied her for a moment, as if trying to piece together the changes in Sarah's demeanor. "I don't know. You just seem a little more aware of the world around you. Like you're starting to see things in a new light." Sarah chuckled, surprised at how perceptive Jessie was. "Maybe I am," she said, her voice softening as she thought back to the conversations she'd had recently. "I don't know, it's just, something feels different lately. It's like I'm seeing everything in a new way. Like I'm finally starting to realize that I don't have to stay stuck in one place." Jessie's eyes widened. "Wait a second. Are you telling me you're actually considering making a change?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I think I've been stuck in a rut for a long time. I've been so focused on getting by, surviving, that I forgot to really live. And I don't want to keep doing that." Jessie grinned, clearly excited. "That's exactly what I thought. Sarah, you've always had so much potential, but you've been holding back. Maybe it's time to take that leap. You know, go after something that makes you feel alive." Sarah felt a rush of emotion flood through her. "I don't know. I mean, I'd love to do something different, but what if I fail?" Jessie laughed, shaking her head. "Failure is part of the process. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. What's the worst that could happen? You learn something new, you grow, and you keep moving forward." Sarah's heart raced as she thought about the possibilities. She had always been scared to take risks, to step out of her comfort zone. But now, with Jessie's encouragement and Elon's words still echoing in her mind, something inside her stirred. Maybe it was time to stop letting fear control her. Maybe it was time to start living the life she really wanted. "I guess you're right," Sarah said slowly, her voice filled with new resolve. "Maybe it's time." Jessie beamed at her, her excitement palpable. "I knew you'd come around. It's all about taking that first step. And once you do, you'll see how much is out there for you. You've got this, Sarah." Before Sarah could respond, Jessie waved a quick goodbye, promising to check in soon. She had to leave for a meeting, but Sarah stood there, watching her friend walk out the door, a sense of clarity beginning to form in her mind. That evening, as Sarah worked through the dinner rush, her thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation with Jessie. It felt like a sign, a push she needed to take that first step, to embrace the unknown. Maybe it wasn't the perfect time, and maybe it would be scary, but for the first time, Sarah was ready to take a risk. As she refilled drinks and took orders, she couldn't help but smile to herself. Maybe her story wasn't over yet. Maybe there was more to her than she had given herself credit for. She had always been waiting for a moment, for someone or something to give her permission to start living differently. But maybe that permission had been inside her all along. And then, just as the night was winding down, another familiar face walked through the door. This time, it was Elon again. But this time, something was different. This time, Sarah felt like she was ready. Sarah had seen Elon Musk come into the restaurant a few times now. Each time, he arrived with that same quiet, unassuming demeanor. He wasn't the man of headlines or a celebrity in the traditional sense when he entered the door, he was simply Elon, someone who seemed more at ease in a low-key environment than in the spotlight that followed him around everywhere else. But tonight, Sarah noticed something different. He wasn't just walking in for a quick meal or a cup of coffee, like he usually did. Tonight, he looked introspective. His face was drawn, as if there was something weighing heavily on him. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for something or perhaps, someone. When he spotted Sarah, their eyes met across the room, and he gave her a small but knowing smile, the kind that felt like a shared secret. Without thinking, she found herself moving toward him, her heart quickening in anticipation. It wasn't like before, when she had approached him on autopilot. This time, something in her gut told her that tonight would be different. "Back again?" she asked, her voice warm but with an undercurrent of curiosity. "Is everything all right, Elon?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gave her a long, thoughtful look, as though weighing whether to open up. Finally, he spoke, but his tone was softer than she'd ever heard before. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said, his voice carrying a hint of vulnerability. "About a lot of things." Sarah paused for a moment, taken aback by the admission. She had never expected him to sound so human, so open. It felt like the kind of conversation you'd have with a friend, not the CEO of multiple billion-dollar companies. "About what, exactly?" she asked, her voice quiet, leaning in slightly as if she didn't want anyone else to overhear. "Everything," he said, his gaze shifting downward for a moment. "I've been running so fast, Sarah. So focused on building the next big thing, on changing the world, but sometimes, I wonder if I've forgotten to live it. To be present. To enjoy the moment. I've become so consumed by all of this, by work, by expectations, that I've lost touch with what really matters." Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of empathy for him. It was hard to imagine what it must be like to be Elon Musk, to carry the weight of entire industries on your shoulders, to be constantly scrutinized. But, in this moment, he wasn't that larger-than-life figure. He was just Elon, someone, like anyone else, trying to figure out what the point of it all really was. "I get that," Sarah said softly. "I think we all do at some point. Get caught up in the grind, I mean. You forget to breathe, forget to live for yourself and not just for everyone else." He looked up at her, eyes locking onto hers with a new intensity. "Exactly. And that's what I'm struggling with. I keep thinking there's always one more thing I have to do, one more goal to hit. But I don't know if that's enough anymore. I've been questioning everything. What if there's more to life than just this endless chase?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle in. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them holding a sense of mutual understanding. She realized then that, in a way, they were both at a crossroads in their lives, searching for something beyond the constant hustle, something more meaningful. She thought about her own life. For so long, she'd been so focused on surviving, on getting by, that she'd never really stopped to think about what she truly wanted. All she knew was that she had been playing it safe, staying in her comfort zone, and avoiding the risks that could lead to a life that was fuller, more authentic. I think it's okay to not have all the answers," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Maybe the key isn't in trying to be everything to everyone or chasing the next big thing. Maybe it's in finding peace with who we are right now, in this moment." Elon nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders visibly relaxing. "You're right," he said, the weight of his words carrying a quiet finality. "I've spent so much time trying to be more than I am, that I've forgotten to just be." There was a long pause before Sarah spoke again, her voice more contemplative now. "I guess we all need reminders sometimes. To stop, look around, and appreciate the simple things." Elon's gaze softened, and he smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to carry years of weariness and wisdom. "Maybe that's exactly why I came back here. To remind myself to stop. To take a breath." Sarah chuckled lightly. I guess that's one thing a good meal can do for you. Yeah, Elon said with a grin. You might be right about that. The rest of the evening passed in a quiet haze, with Sarah serving food to guests as usual. But in her mind, she kept returning to the conversation with Elon. She had never expected to connect with him on such a personal level. It felt like he had been seeking something real, just like she was. After the restaurant quieted down, Sarah found herself reflecting on the conversation long after she'd left work. The world had a funny way of revealing its truths when you least expected it, and tonight had been one of those moments. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. It was as though a veil had been lifted, and she could finally see the path ahead of her, however uncertain it might be. She knew she had to start making choices that aligned with who she truly was, not who she thought she should be. As she got dressed and prepared for another day at the restaurant, she thought back to Elon's words, about being present, about taking a step back from the relentless chase. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had permission to dream. As she walked out the door, a sense of quiet anticipation settled in her chest. Maybe it was time to stop wondering and start acting. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to take that first step towards something new. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Sarah couldn't explain it, but something had clicked inside her. It wasn't that she had everything figured out, far from it, but there was this subtle shift in her mindset. She had spent so much of her life thinking in black and white terms, either you were successful, or you weren't, either you were happy, or you were stuck. But now, everything felt more fluid. There was a sense that maybe, just maybe, life wasn't about finding the perfect formula. It was about the journey itself, the moments in between. As Sarah prepared for work, she found herself thinking back to her conversation with Elon. How he had opened up about his own struggles, how he was questioning everything, even after achieving so much. It wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about finding peace. Sarah didn't know what peace would look like for her, but she knew she had to start somewhere. That evening, as Sarah worked the dinner shift, she felt a sense of calm that she hadn't experienced in a long time. She moved from table to table with a new energy, a quiet sense of purpose guiding her actions. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore. Each interaction felt genuine, as if she were giving more of herself to the people around her. Then, just as she was about to deliver a tray of drinks, she felt a familiar presence near the back of the restaurant. She looked up and saw Elon again. This time, however, it wasn't just his usual quiet demeanor. He looked different. There was a spark in his eyes, like he had made a decision, and now he was moving toward it with a newfound determination. He smiled at her when he saw her glance in his direction, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a curious mix of excitement and nervousness. It was as if this encounter had the potential to be more than just a simple meeting, it could be a turning point. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice light but with a hint of something deeper behind it. "Got a minute?" Sarah set the tray of drinks down on a nearby table and walked over to his booth. "Of course. Everything okay?" Elon gestured to the seat across from him. "Yeah, just needed to talk. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and there's something I want to ask you." Sarah sat down, sensing that this was more than just small talk. She leaned in slightly, waiting for him to continue. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about being present," Elon began, his tone introspective. "I've spent so much of my life pushing for the next big thing, constantly reaching for more. But the truth is, I've never really been here, in the moment. Not like I should be." Sarah nodded, feeling a connection to his words. She knew exactly what he meant. There had been so many times when she had felt trapped in the hustle, pushing through her days without truly appreciating them. It wasn't until recently that she had begun to realize how much she had been missing. "I get that," she said softly. "It's easy to get caught up in what's next, always thinking that once you reach the next goal, everything will fall into place. But it doesn't work like that. The next thing just leads to the next thing. Elon smiled slightly, as though Sarah had voiced exactly what he had been feeling. Exactly. But I've been trying to change that. I've been focusing more on the now. Trying to be more intentional with how I spend my time. And I've come to a realization, Sarah, I need to stop running from things. I need to embrace where I am, right here. Her heart fluttered at his words. She had no idea what this realization might mean for him, but something about his vulnerability made her feel like she was witnessing a moment of transformation. It was one thing to talk about change, but another entirely to take those first steps toward it. That sounds like a big change, Sarah said, her voice filled with a mix of admiration and curiosity. How do you even start with something like that? Elon leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. I've been thinking about that too. It's not easy to just flip a switch. But I think it starts with small moments. Being more present. Paying attention to the things around me. And letting go of the fear of failure. Sarah felt a spark of inspiration. She realized that what Elon was saying mirrored her own thoughts. Perhaps the journey toward a more meaningful life wasn't about achieving some grand success. It was about finding joy in the little things, in the connections we make, and in the willingness to be open to new experiences, even the scary ones. You know, Sarah said, I think we're on the same page here. I've been thinking a lot about the things I want to change in my life, too. Like, taking more risks. Stepping outside of my comfort zone. Elon raised an eyebrow. Really? What kind of risks are you thinking about? Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to articulate what was bubbling inside her. She had always been cautious, always held herself back. But lately, there had been this undeniable pull to explore more, to challenge herself. I don't know yet, she admitted, a little nervous but also excited by the uncertainty. But I think it's time to stop waiting for the right moment. It's time to just start. To go after what I want, even if it's scary. Elon smiled again, his eyes gleaming with something like recognition. That's exactly it, Sarah. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need the courage to take that first step. The rest will follow. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts, each processing the weight of what had been said. There was a sense of understanding between them, two people at different points in their lives, yet both facing the same internal struggle. Well, Elon said after a while, breaking the silence, I think you're on the right track. And you know, you don't have to do it alone. Sometimes, all it takes is a little encouragement from someone else. Sarah smiled, feeling the warmth of his words settle in her chest. Thank you, Elon. I really appreciate that. He stood up, ready to leave, but before he walked away, he turned back to her. You've got this, Sarah. I'm rooting for you. As he walked out of the restaurant, Sarah stood there for a moment, watching him go. For the first time, she didn't feel like just a server or someone stuck in the background. She felt like she had the potential to create something new for herself. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be perfect. But it was hers. And that was all she needed to begin. The days that followed felt different to Sarah. The kind of different where every small action, every decision, seemed to carry more weight, more meaning. It wasn't that her life had drastically changed overnight, but the way she viewed it had. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was taking control, like she was no longer just drifting through the motions. Elon's words echoed in her mind. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need the courage to take that first step. He was right. For so long, Sarah had been waiting for the right time, the right moment to take that leap. But what if the right time never came? What if it was up to her to create it? Sarah knew she couldn't stay in the same place forever. She needed change. The question was, where would that change lead her? The restaurant had always been her safe haven, the one place where she could rely on routine. It was familiar, comforting, even when the work was grueling. But as Sarah worked the dinner shift that night, she realized just how much she had outgrown the role she had played for so long. She found herself moving through the restaurant, delivering food to tables, but her mind kept wandering. She looked around at the customers, the staff, the bustle of activity, and realized that while she appreciated the work, she no longer saw herself here forever. Her shift ended later than usual, and as Sarah packed up her things to leave, a thought surfaced in her mind. She had always loved the idea of opening her own cafe, a cozy little spot where people could escape from the chaos of life. It had been a dream tucked away for years, but she had never dared to believe it could be a reality. But now, it didn't seem so impossible. She didn't need to know all the answers or have everything figured out in advance. What she needed was to start, just like she had with every other change in her life. Sarah made up her mind. She was going to take that first step. The next morning, she awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. Her thoughts were clear, and she knew what she had to do. She grabbed her phone and started researching small business loans, permits, potential locations for her dream cafe. The idea was still in its infancy, but that was the beauty of it. She was finally giving herself permission to dream and to act on those dreams. By mid-afternoon, Sarah had compiled a list of potential locations. She'd reached out to a few business contacts she had made over the years, and she had a meeting scheduled with a local lender to discuss financing. It was all happening faster than she had expected, but for the first time, she felt excitement instead of fear. That evening, as she arrived at the restaurant for her shift, Sarah's mind was alive with possibilities. She couldn't wait to start working on her dream, but she also knew that there was still a lot of hard work ahead. Still, the prospect of finally doing something for herself, something she had always wanted, felt like a fresh start. She walked in through the back entrance, her steps more purposeful than they had ever been. But as soon as she entered the restaurant, she saw him again. Elon was sitting in his usual booth, but this time, he was on the phone. He looked up when he saw her approach, and there was something different about the way he looked at her. It was as though he knew something had shifted in her too. Sarah took a deep breath and walked over to him. "Hey," she said, a slight smile on her face. Elon lowered his phone and nodded, acknowledging her presence. "Hey, Sarah. How's everything going?" "Good," she replied, pausing for a moment. "Actually, better than good. I think I've finally made a decision." He raised an eyebrow. "A decision? About what?" "I'm going to do it," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet excitement. "I'm going to open my own cafe." Elon's expression softened, a look of genuine admiration crossing his face. "That's incredible. I'm really proud of you. I know how long you've been talking about it." "I've been talking about it for years," she admitted, "but I never thought I could actually make it happen. I always thought there were too many obstacles. But now, I don't know. It feels like the right time." Elon smiled, his eyes gleaming with something like approval. "I think you're right. Sometimes, we get so caught up in the obstacles that we forget about the possibilities. But once you take that first step, things start to fall into place. You'll figure it out." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward him. His words had meant more than she could express. He had given her the courage to take this leap, to believe in herself in a way she never had before. "Thanks, Elon. For everything. You've no idea how much that conversation the other night meant to me." Elon shrugged, a humble look on his face. "I'm just glad I could help. You've got this, Sarah. And hey, if you need any advice, you know where to find me." She laughed softly. "I might take you up on that. But for now, I think I've got a lot of work ahead of me." As Sarah walked away to take care of her duties, her mind buzzed with excitement. For the first time, she felt like she had a clear direction. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building something. Something that mattered to her. The evening passed quickly, and when Sarah finally clocked out, she felt a sense of pride in the steps she had already taken. She was no longer standing at the edge of a dream, afraid to take the plunge. She had already begun her journey. As she walked to her car, the cool evening air was refreshing against her skin. Sarah smiled, looking up at the stars above. This was just the beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, yes. But it was hers to walk. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and a constant whirlwind of logistics. Sarah had always been someone who appreciated structure, but this was something entirely different. There were permits to apply for, business plans to create, and countless decisions to make that felt like they carried the weight of the world. But Sarah was determined. Every morning she woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, eager to dive into the day's tasks. She worked her shift at the restaurant, then spent her afternoons and evenings in coffee shops, libraries, or wherever she could find a quiet space to work on her business plan. There were days when the pressure felt overwhelming, but with each passing day, she could feel herself growing stronger. One evening, Sarah met with a local lender who had shown interest in her idea. She had done her research, but as she sat across from the woman in the polished office, her nerves were getting the better of her. This meeting could be the difference between turning her dream into a reality or watching it crumble before it had even begun. "Tell me about your vision for the cafe," the woman asked, glancing down at Sarah's business plan, which was spread out in front of her. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. "I want it to be a place where people can escape from the chaos of their day-to-day lives. A cozy space where they can enjoy high-quality coffee, fresh pastries, and good conversation. It's not just about the food or the drinks, it's about the experience. I want people to feel like they're at home, like they've found a little sanctuary in the middle of their busy world." The woman nodded, clearly impressed. "And how do you plan to differentiate yourself from other cafes in the area?" Sarah paused, thinking about the other options around town. "There are plenty of cafes in the area, but I think what sets me apart is the focus on community. I want to host events, open mic nights, book clubs, things that bring people together. I also plan to have a rotating menu of local pastries and baked goods, supporting local businesses." The woman leaned back in her chair, considering Sarah's words. There was a long silence, and Sarah could feel her pulse quicken. This was the moment of truth. Finally, the woman spoke. "I like what I'm hearing. I think you've got a unique concept here, and I believe there's a market for it. However, there are a few things we'll need to work through before we can move forward." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of things?" The woman flipped through the pages of the business plan, pointing to a few sections. "Your financial projections need to be more detailed. And we'll need a clearer breakdown of the startup costs. I also want to see your marketing plan and how you plan to attract customers in the first few months. But these are all things we can work through together. I like your vision, and I think with a few adjustments, we can make this happen." Sarah exhaled, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't a yes yet, but it was close. She had the chance to make it work. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I'll get those revisions to you as soon as possible." The woman smiled. "Take your time. But just know that I'm on board with this. I think you've got something special here, Sarah." As Sarah left the office that day, she felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. This was it. She was so close to making it happen. But she also knew there was still so much work ahead of her. There was no shortcut to success, and every step she took had to be deliberate and calculated. But for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt empowered. A few days later, Sarah met with a group of contractors to discuss potential renovations for the space she had chosen. It was an old building in a quiet neighborhood, but it had the potential to be something truly unique. The walls were exposed brick, and the high ceilings gave the place a sense of openness. It was exactly the kind of vibe she wanted, warm, welcoming, and full of character. She walked through the space with the contractors, pointing out areas that needed attention. As they discussed the plans, Sarah's excitement grew. The idea of transforming this old building into her dream cafe was becoming more and more real. But she also couldn't ignore the anxiety that crept in as the contractors presented their estimates. Renovations were expensive, way more expensive than she had anticipated. Sarah knew she had to keep her budget in check, but it was hard not to get carried away with the vision. She had so many ideas for how the space could come together, but each change, each addition, came with a price tag. The reality of how much money she was going to need to make this dream a reality began to sink in. That night, as she lay in bed, her mind raced. She had the vision. She had the determination. But she also had to be smart. The cafe wasn't just about passion, it was about managing the business side of things, too. She couldn't afford to get caught up in the excitement of the project without considering the financial risks. She had made a promise to herself that she wouldn't let fear hold her back, but now, it felt like the fear was creeping in, threatening to take over. "Focus," she whispered to herself, her hand clutching the edge of the blanket. "Just focus. Take it one step at a time." But no matter how many times she told herself that, the pressure weighed heavily on her. The stakes were high, and she was about to put everything on the line for a dream that was still so fragile. It was in these moments, in the stillness of the night, that Sarah had to remind herself why she was doing this in the first place. This wasn't just about opening a cafe. This was about proving to herself that she could take risks. It was about making a change, creating something meaningful, and embracing the uncertainty that came with it. She took a deep breath, letting the fear subside, at least for now. Tomorrow, she would face the contractors again. She would keep pushing forward, step by step. And somehow, she would find a way to make it work. Sarah had spent the next few weeks adjusting to a rhythm that felt like a delicate balance between excitement and fear. The cafe renovations were in full swing, and every day, she witnessed the transformation of the space. The dusty old floors were being replaced with polished wood, the exposed brick walls were getting a fresh coat of paint, and the old windows were being framed with stylish new trim. Every detail was coming together, but the costs kept rising, and she could feel the financial pressure mounting. She had been working tirelessly to secure the necessary funds, revising her financial projections and reaching out to potential investors. Yet, every time she felt like she was getting closer to a breakthrough, there was another obstacle to overcome. It was becoming clear that the hardest part of this entire journey wasn't the renovations or the design, it was the constant struggle to ensure that the cafe would be able to sustain itself long-term. One morning, after another exhausting day spent at the cafe, Sarah found herself sitting at a small cafe around the corner from her restaurant. She ordered a cup of coffee and stared at the steam rising from the mug, lost in thought. It had been a few weeks since her last meeting with the lender, and she had yet to hear back. The silence was deafening. Had she done something wrong? Was her plan not strong enough? She wasn't sure what to expect, but the waiting felt unbearable. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was an email notification from the lender. Sarah's heart raced as she clicked open the message, her fingers trembling slightly. Subject: regarding your loan application. She read the email quickly, her eyes scanning for the key information. The words were polite, but they stung. "Unfortunately, we are unable to move forward with your loan at this time." The email went on to explain that, despite the promising concept and Sarah's passion, the risks were too high for them to approve the loan. The financial projections were too uncertain, and the location, while charming, wasn't in an area with enough foot traffic to guarantee success. Sarah felt the color drain from her face as she read the email a second time. It was a blow she hadn't anticipated. She had worked so hard, and for so long, that the idea of failure, of seeing her dream slip away, felt almost unbearable. She pushed the phone away and sat back in her chair, staring out the window at the busy street outside. People were moving, living their lives, while Sarah sat there frozen, the weight of disappointment sinking in. For a moment, she thought about giving up. What if the cafe wasn't meant to be? What if she wasn't cut out for this? It would be so easy to just walk away, to leave it all behind and return to the comfort of the familiar, the restaurant, the security of her old life. But then, she thought about her conversation with Elon. She thought about the courage he had shown when he took risks of his own, building SpaceX and Tesla into global powerhouses. It had been hard for him too. It wasn't just about success, it was about the willingness to keep moving forward, no matter what. Sarah could feel the determination growing inside of her again. She wasn't ready to give up, not now, not when she had come this far. She knew she needed to dig deeper. She couldn't let this setback be the end. She pulled her phone back toward her and sent a message to Elon, hoping he might have some advice to offer. "Hey Elon, can I ask for some advice? I'm feeling a little stuck with the cafe. I just got a rejection from the bank for the loan, and I don't know what to do next." The reply came quickly, as it always did. "Don't let one rejection stop you. It's just part of the process. You'll face more of them, but it doesn't mean you're not on the right path. The question is, what are you going to do about it? There are always other ways to make it work." Reading his words, Sarah felt a small spark of hope. She wasn't going to let this rejection define her. She had a vision, and she wasn't about to let it slip away because of one obstacle. As the day went on, Sarah spent the afternoon revisiting her financials. She reviewed every line item, every projection, and looked at her options. She called local small business organizations and even reached out to a few potential investors she had met through her research. There had to be a way to make it work. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that she wasn't just asking for money, she was asking for faith. She needed people to believe in her and her vision. She had already proven to herself that she could make things happen, even when the odds were stacked against her. That evening, Sarah sat down with her team of contractors, who were hard at work installing the cafe's new counter. She told them about the loan rejection and the uncertainty she was feeling, and for the first time in a long time, she felt vulnerable. But their response surprised her. "We believe in you, Sarah," one of the contractors said. "We've seen you put everything into this place. We're here to help. Let us know what we can do to support you." It was exactly the kind of support she needed. As they brainstormed ways to keep the project on track without relying solely on the loan, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just her dream anymore, it was everyone's. The people who had been working alongside her believed in it just as much as she did, and that gave her the strength to keep going. By the time Sarah left the cafe that night, she had a plan. She would apply for smaller business grants, focus on crowdfunding through a campaign that highlighted the community aspect of her cafe, and explore other funding avenues that didn't require traditional loans. It was going to be harder than she had anticipated, but she knew now that she wasn't in this alone. She was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following the rejection were a whirlwind of action. Sarah had shifted her focus, exploring every alternative funding option she could find. She reached out to local business incubators, started a crowdfunding campaign to rally the community, and even contacted angel investors who might be interested in taking a chance on a startup like hers. Each step forward brought its own challenges, but Sarah was relentless. The cafe renovations continued to take shape. The warm, inviting atmosphere she had envisioned was beginning to materialize. The counter was installed, the kitchen was nearly complete, and the seating area was starting to look like a place where people could truly gather. But despite all the progress, Sarah still felt a gnawing sense of unease in the back of her mind. Every day felt like a balancing act. She was spending long hours on the phone with potential investors, negotiating terms with contractors, and still working her shift at the restaurant to pay the bills. There were moments when the exhaustion threatened to take over, but Sarah refused to let it. She had come too far to back down now. One Tuesday afternoon, as she sat at the small desk in her apartment, reviewing a series of emails, her phone buzzed. It was an email from one of the crowdfunding platforms she had set up a campaign on. Subject: Your campaign, a big step forward. Her heart raced as she opened the email, her pulse quickening. Could this be the breakthrough she had been hoping for? The email began with an announcement of her campaign's success in reaching its initial funding goal, an achievement that was exciting in itself, but the real surprise came next. We are pleased to inform you that your campaign has caught the attention of a group of investors who are interested in discussing further support. They were impressed by the local community backing, and they believe in the vision of your cafe. We would like to introduce you to them as a next step. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Could it be? This wasn't just a small grant or donation. This was an opportunity to secure more significant backing from investors who saw potential in her dream. It was the kind of validation she had been searching for. She quickly clicked on the link in the email, which led to a scheduling page where she could book a meeting with the group of investors. Her hands shook as she set up the appointment for the following Thursday. The uncertainty that had plagued her for so long suddenly felt more manageable. She was about to have a real shot at making the cafe not just a dream, but a thriving business. As she closed her laptop, Sarah took a moment to collect herself. It was hard to believe this was happening. After so many setbacks, so many sleepless nights, it felt like she was finally getting the break she had been waiting for. The day of the meeting, Sarah put on her best blazer and did her best to ignore the nerves bubbling up inside of her. This was a big deal, and she knew that she needed to be at her best if she was going to convince these investors that she was the right person to lead this project forward. When she arrived at the meeting, she was greeted by 3 individuals, 2 men and a woman, who had a professional yet approachable demeanor. They were seated at a large conference table, and Sarah took a deep breath before sitting down. "We're excited to meet you, Sarah," the woman said, offering a smile. "We've been following your crowdfunding campaign, and we're impressed by what we've seen so far. It's clear you've got a strong vision, and we're curious to hear more about how you plan to bring it to life." Sarah felt a surge of confidence. This was her moment to shine. She launched into her pitch, describing the cafe's concept in detail, explaining how it would focus on community, local partnerships, and a unique customer experience. She spoke about her passion for coffee, her desire to create a safe space for people, and her plans for hosting events to bring people together. She outlined her vision for the first few months, focusing on the soft launch and the marketing strategy she had developed. The investors listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and engaging with her ideas. As the conversation progressed, Sarah could feel the energy in the room shift. These investors were not just hearing her pitch, they were seeing her passion, her dedication, and her willingness to push through every obstacle to make this happen. Finally, after what felt like hours, one of the men, a middle-aged entrepreneur named Mark, leaned forward. "Sarah, I have to say, we're impressed. You've put a lot of thought into this, and it's clear that you have a deep connection to your community and your customers. That's exactly the kind of commitment we look for in an investment." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Was this really happening? "We'd like to offer you a partnership," Mark continued. "We believe in your vision, and we'd like to help you make it a reality. We'll provide the funding you need, and in return, we'd be happy to take an equity stake in the business." Sarah's mind raced. This was it. The opportunity she had been working toward was finally within her grasp. She had to keep herself together, though. This was just the beginning. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. "This is exactly what I've been working for. I'm ready to take the next steps." The meeting wrapped up with more details about the terms of the partnership, but Sarah could hardly contain her excitement. As she left the building, she felt like she was walking on air. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. Her cafe wasn't just a dream anymore, it was becoming a reality. That evening, as Sarah sat at her small kitchen table, she opened the email from the investors, officially accepting their offer. She couldn't stop smiling. The hard work, the setbacks, and the sleepless nights had all led to this moment. She had finally secured the support she needed to move forward. But as she stared at the email, a part of her knew that this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The cafe was about to become a real, thriving business, and there would be new challenges ahead. But with the support of her investors, her community, and the incredible team she had built, Sarah felt ready to face whatever came next. She had taken the leap, and now, she was flying. The excitement of securing the investment was still fresh in Sarah's mind, but as the days passed, she began to feel the weight of what it truly meant. The investors were on board, the funding was secured, and the renovations were nearly finished. But Sarah knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The cafe was set to open in just a few weeks, and there was so much to do. She had a team to hire, menus to finalize, marketing campaigns to launch, and, most importantly, a reputation to build. It wasn't enough to simply open the doors and hope for the best. The cafe had to stand out in a crowded market, and Sarah had to make sure that it wasn't just another place to grab a cup of coffee, it had to be an experience, a place that felt like home. The pressure weighed heavily on her shoulders, and every time she thought about the tasks ahead, the list seemed to grow longer. But she was determined. She had faced so many setbacks already. She had to make this work. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and late-night planning sessions. Sarah worked closely with her team to finalize the layout of the cafe, making sure that every corner reflected the vision she had in her mind. She collaborated with local artists to create a mural for the back wall that would serve as a focal point, a piece of art that would bring the space to life. The hiring process proved to be one of the more difficult parts of the journey. Sarah wanted to build a team that was as passionate about the cafe's mission as she was. She didn't just want employees, she wanted partners, people who believed in the same values of community, connection, and quality that she did. After several rounds of interviews, she finally found the right people. Carla, a former barista who had a deep love for crafting the perfect latte, and Nathan, a marketing expert with a knack for social media and community outreach, were among the first to join the team. Sarah had a feeling they were exactly what the cafe needed. Despite the sense of progress, Sarah couldn't ignore the doubts that crept in during the quiet moments. Were they really ready for this? Would people show up on opening day? What if the cafe didn't live up to the hype? One evening, Sarah met with Elon again. This time, they were sitting at a small, dimly lit bar in downtown, and the conversation was more personal than before. "You're getting closer, I can feel it," Elon said, his eyes scanning the room. "But I know what it's like to be in your shoes. You've crossed a huge hurdle, but the hardest part is still ahead. You're going to have to take some risks, and you're going to fail sometimes. But that's how you learn." Sarah nodded, grateful for his honesty. "I've been thinking about that a lot. There are so many unknowns. I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water sometimes." Elon gave a small smile. "It's normal. You'll be fine. But if you're going to do this right, you need to trust your gut. You're going to have people telling you what they think you should do, but in the end, it's your vision that matters. You're not building this for anyone else, you're building it for yourself and the people who will walk through those doors." It was exactly what Sarah needed to hear. She had been so focused on getting everything perfect, on pleasing everyone, that she had forgotten why she started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about creating a place that appealed to everyone, it was about creating a space that was authentic, one that reflected who she was and what she believed in. The day before the cafe's soft opening, Sarah found herself standing in the middle of the cafe, looking around at everything she had worked so hard for. The cafe was almost ready. The smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, and the space had a warm, welcoming vibe. The tables were set, the menu boards hung on the walls, and the final touches were in place. But even as she marveled at the transformation, her nerves began to creep up. Tomorrow was the day that everything would either take off or fall flat. It was the moment of truth. She sat down at one of the tables, her hands clasped tightly together. This was it. The first step toward making her dream a reality. "Hey, you okay?" Nathan's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. He was holding a clipboard, checking off a list of last-minute details. "Yeah," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "Just nervous, I guess." Nathan sat down across from her. "It's normal to be nervous. But we've done everything we can. We've built something special here, Sarah. The people will come." Sarah nodded, but she couldn't shake the worry. What if they didn't come? What if her vision wasn't enough to bring the crowds in? The sound of the door opening interrupted her thoughts. She turned and saw Carla walking in, carrying a tray of pastries they had just finished testing earlier that day. "I know you're nervous," Carla said, setting the tray down on the counter. "But you've already done the hardest part. You're here. You've made it. And tomorrow, we'll make sure it's a day to remember." Sarah smiled, feeling a small wave of reassurance wash over her. She wasn't alone in this. She had a team that believed in her and in the cafe. Together, they had built something that had the potential to change their lives. The next day, as the clock struck 10 a.m., Sarah stood at the front door of the cafe, ready for the soft opening. The chairs and tables were set up, the lights were dimmed to create an inviting atmosphere, and the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. A few curious locals had started trickling in, and the energy was electric. She glanced at Nathan and Carla, who were manning the front counter, and took a deep breath. This was it. The moment she had worked so hard for. She opened the door, and with a warm smile, greeted the first customers to step inside. "Welcome to the Hearth Cafe," she said, her voice steady. "We're so glad you're here." The first few hours of the soft opening were a blur. The cafe was filled with the hum of chatter, the clink of mugs being set down, and the soft sound of indie music playing in the background. People had begun to filter in, some locals who were curious, others who had heard about the opening through word of mouth or social media. Sarah watched as the space began to fill, her heart racing with excitement and nerves. "Everything going well?" Nathan asked as he slid a steaming latte across the counter to a customer. Sarah nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yeah, it's going better than I expected. But it's still early. We'll see how things go once the crowd gets bigger." Carla, who was working the back of the cafe, poked her head out of the kitchen with a bright smile. "We've got a full house out there. I can barely keep up with the orders. But I think we're doing okay." Sarah couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. This was the moment she had worked so hard for, the cafe was open, and people were enjoying what she had created. But as the day wore on, she realized there was more to running a cafe than just the initial excitement. By noon, the cafe had reached full capacity. Customers were lining up to place orders, the kitchen was working overtime to keep up with the demand, and the baristas were getting into a rhythm. But amidst the positive energy, small hiccups began to surface. A coffee machine malfunctioned, and the line at the counter grew longer. Some of the pastries were running low, and the wait times were starting to increase. Sarah could see the anxiety on her team's faces as they worked to manage the growing crowd. "You've got this," Nathan said, his voice calm but firm as he handed Sarah a coffee order. "We're just getting started. Let's take it one step at a time." Sarah took a deep breath, thankful for Nathan's level-headedness. She knew he was right. This was the first test of many, and no cafe was perfect from the start. The important thing was to stay composed and address the issues as they came. Around mid-afternoon, a group of regulars from the local neighborhood arrived, people who had seen the cafe under construction and had been following its progress on social media. They were excited to try out the new spot and immediately ordered a round of drinks. "This place looks amazing," one of the customers, a middle-aged woman named Linda, said as she sipped on her cappuccino. "I've been following you on Instagram, and I couldn't wait to come in." Sarah smiled, trying to mask the exhaustion creeping up on her. "Thank you for being here. We're still figuring things out, but I hope you enjoy it." As Linda and her friends chatted, Sarah took a moment to step back and survey the cafe. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, just as she had hoped. People were laughing, chatting, and enjoying their drinks. The sense of community she had wanted to create was slowly coming to life. But then, just as Sarah was beginning to relax, the fire alarm went off. It wasn't a full-blown emergency, but the sound was loud enough to send everyone into a mild panic. The staff scrambled to figure out what was happening, and Sarah rushed to the back of the cafe to check on the situation. Carla was standing in front of the stove, a small puff of smoke rising from a batch of cookies she had just taken out of the oven. I think I burnt them," Carla said sheepishly, her face flushed with embarrassment. Sarah couldn't help but laugh, the tension momentarily breaking. "It's okay. We'll survive. Just, maybe let's hold off on the baking for a bit." As the fire alarm finally stopped blaring and the customers settled back into their seats, Sarah realized that this was part of the process. It wasn't always going to go smoothly, but they would learn from each mistake and keep moving forward. The cafe wasn't perfect yet, but that was okay, it was real. And that was what mattered. By the end of the day, Sarah felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. They had survived the soft opening, and while it hadn't been flawless, it had been an undeniable success. The customers seemed happy, and they had made it through their first real test. Nathan approached her as she began to clean up, holding a clipboard with notes from the day. "Not bad, right?" he said with a grin. "We've got some kinks to iron out, but I think we made a great first impression." Sarah nodded, her tired eyes sparkling with hope. "We did good. But tomorrow's a new day. We'll fix the issues, improve, and make it even better." Carla popped out from the back, holding a half-eaten cookie. "Well, I think the burnt ones were still a hit," she joked, giving Sarah a wink. "Next time, we'll aim for perfection," Sarah said with a smile, before turning her attention to the cafe floor, surveying everything one last time before they closed for the night. The cafe was quieter now, but the energy that had filled the space earlier still lingered. As Sarah locked up for the night, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. There were moments today when she had doubted herself, moments when she wasn't sure they were going to make it through the chaos. But looking around at her team, at the cafe, at the people who had come to support her, she realized that they had already won. This wasn't just a place to get coffee. It was a community hub, a safe space, and a dream that was becoming real. The next day would bring more challenges, more lessons, and more growth, but she was ready. She had fought for this, and she wasn't going to stop now. The first week after the soft opening had been a whirlwind. The cafe had seen a steady stream of customers, and word of mouth was spreading. But as with any new venture, the challenges weren't over. There were still long lines, some hiccups with staffing, and the occasional kitchen disaster, like the time Carla accidentally dropped an entire tray of scones on the floor. But through it all, the atmosphere remained welcoming, and Sarah could see her dream slowly taking shape. Today, however, felt different. There was an electric buzz in the air, something Sarah couldn't quite place. It was early afternoon, and the cafe was moderately busy, with a mix of regulars and first-timers. Sarah was sitting at the counter, reviewing inventory orders, when she noticed a tall figure walk through the door. At first, she thought it was just another customer, someone who had wandered in for a quick coffee or a pastry, but as the man moved toward the counter, something about his presence struck her. He wasn't just a regular guy, there was an aura around him, a quiet intensity that drew attention. He had a casual yet polished look, a dark jacket, black jeans, and a white shirt that seemed to glow under the cafe's warm lights. It was Elon Musk. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea why he was there or how he'd even heard about the cafe, but she instantly recognized him. Of course, she had seen him before on social media, in interviews, and in the news. But seeing him in person was an entirely different experience. He was a living legend, a tech mogul, an entrepreneur who had reshaped industries. And here he was, standing in the middle of her cafe like any other customer. She froze for a second, unsure of how to react. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though her voice shook ever so slightly. Elon's lips curled into a small, approachable smile. "I'll take a cappuccino," he said in a low, smooth voice. "And maybe one of those blueberry muffins. They look incredible." Sarah quickly regained her composure, nodding. "Coming right up." She motioned for Carla to take the order as she moved to prepare the cappuccino herself. Elon took a seat by the window, his presence still commanding attention even though he tried to be discreet. Sarah couldn't help but watch him from the corner of her eye. Why was he here? What did he want? As the minutes ticked by, the cafe began to fill up with even more customers. Sarah had almost forgotten about Elon's presence until she noticed him staring at the cafe's back wall, where the mural Sarah had commissioned from a local artist depicted a striking scene of a rocket launching into the sky. There was something about Elon's gaze that made Sarah uneasy. He wasn't just admiring the art, he was studying it, examining every detail. Finally, he stood up and walked over to the counter where Sarah was working. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "the mural is great. But I think there's something missing." Sarah blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" He glanced at the mural again, then back at Sarah. "The rocket, it's all about the launch, the beginning of something big. But what happens after? It's not just about where you're going. It's about how you get there." Sarah's eyebrows furrowed. "You're right. I hadn't thought of that." Elon nodded. "A lot of people focus on the destination without considering the journey. You've got the energy of the launch, the excitement, but you need the space to show the path forward, the obstacles, the struggles. Otherwise, it's just a nice picture of a rocket, but it doesn't tell the whole story." Sarah didn't know what to say. Elon Musk, of all people, was offering her advice on a mural in her cafe. And yet, his words struck a chord deep within her. It wasn't just about the start, it was about everything that followed. She had spent so much time thinking about her cafe's launch, about making everything perfect for opening day. But the journey ahead was going to be long and filled with challenges. The cafe wasn't just about the excitement of the opening, it was about how it would evolve, how it would adapt, how it would grow through the inevitable bumps along the way. "I'll think about that," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elon smiled again, a small but genuine curve of his lips. "I'm not saying you need to change the whole thing. But just keep that in mind. Every journey has its own set of problems. You've got a great start here, but the real test is in the long run. It's not just about making it happen, it's about making it last." With that, Elon picked up his cappuccino and muffin, gave Sarah a nod, and walked out of the cafe without another word. He didn't seem to make a big deal of his visit. No grand speeches. No fanfare. Just a quiet interaction with a small business owner who was trying to make something meaningful out of nothing. But for Sarah, his words lingered long after he left. She couldn't shake the weight of them. It wasn't just about the opening day, it was about building something sustainable, something that could withstand the ups and downs of life. The real challenge wasn't in getting to the top, it was in staying there. The next day, Sarah stood before the mural, her eyes tracing the path of the rocket again. Elon's words echoed in her mind as she studied the image. There was a journey to be told, a story of obstacles and triumphs, a story of perseverance. Maybe she needed to adjust the mural, to incorporate those elements. To show the world that the cafe wasn't just a flash in the pan, it was part of a bigger story. A story that would unfold over time, one challenge at a time. She walked over to her phone and opened the design file for the mural. A few changes, a few tweaks. She could do this. The mural could tell the whole story, not just the start, but everything that came after. By the time Sarah left the cafe that evening, she felt more energized than she had in days. Elon had given her more than just advice on a mural. He had reminded her of the bigger picture, the journey. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be days when she doubted herself, when she felt like giving up. But she wasn't just building a cafe. She was building something that would last, something that would leave a mark. She had to remember that. As Sarah locked the door and turned off the lights for the night, she smiled. She had a new sense of purpose. Tomorrow, the journey would continue. The cafe had now been open for 3 weeks, and Sarah was beginning to see the momentum building. The soft opening chaos had settled into a more predictable routine. The customers who had visited during the first few days were now regulars, coming in for their morning coffee or afternoon treats. Sarah and her team had learned a lot in such a short amount of time, but there was still so much to be done. The cafe wasn't perfect, but it had a charm that drew people in, and the staff, though still learning, had become more cohesive. Sarah felt proud of the progress, but a gnawing sense of uncertainty was creeping into her thoughts. She knew the real test was coming, the point where she had to scale and keep the balance between growth and quality. "Sarah," Nathan said as he slid into the seat across from her during a brief moment of downtime, "we're getting busier every day. Have you thought about expanding the menu or adding more staff? It's only going to get more intense." Sarah ran a hand through her hair, taking a sip of her coffee. "I have thought about it. But I don't want to overextend ourselves. We're doing okay as is, but if we add too much too quickly, we might lose what makes us special." Nathan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get that. But if we keep growing at this rate, we'll need more resources to keep up. It's not just about adding people, it's about making sure we can maintain the quality of everything we offer. People are going to expect more, and that means we have to be ready." Sarah stared out the window, watching the busy street outside. He was right. She had to think ahead. But what if she wasn't ready? What if growing too fast would make her lose control? The idea of compromising the quality of her cafe, something she had worked so hard to build, terrified her. That evening, after the last customer left and the cafe was closed for the night, Sarah sat alone in the empty space. The cafe had become her refuge, the place where she felt the most herself, but it was also becoming a constant source of pressure. The demands of running the business, keeping everything afloat, and meeting expectations were starting to take their toll. She was staring at the inventory sheet on her phone when a text message from her sister popped up. "How's everything going with the cafe? Still feeling good?" Sarah sighed, her thumb hovering over the screen. It was tempting to tell her sister how stressed she was, how much doubt lingered in her mind, but Sarah didn't want to burden anyone with her worries. Instead, she typed a quick response. "Yeah, it's going well. Busy, but good." That wasn't entirely untrue. Things were good. But they were also challenging, and Sarah didn't know how much longer she could juggle everything on her own. She needed a plan for what came next, something that would keep the cafe true to its roots while giving it room to grow. The next day, Sarah made a list of the things that worried her the most: keeping the quality high, hiring more staff, managing the growing demand, and expanding the menu. She wrote down each challenge and tried to break it down into smaller, manageable steps. But no matter how much she tried to organize her thoughts, the weight of it all felt overwhelming. Just then, Carla came out from the back with a tray of fresh pastries, smiling brightly. "We're going to need more space for all these orders soon," she said as she set the tray down on the counter. "We've had the best turnout this week. I can't believe how many people are showing up." Sarah smiled faintly, glad to see Carla's optimism. "It's amazing, right? But it's also starting to feel like we're running out of room." Carla's expression softened. "I get that. But hey, you're doing an amazing job. Look around. People are happy. We're making it work." For the first time in days, Sarah felt a sense of relief. Carla was right. The cafe was a success. It was growing, and the challenges would always be there. But they weren't insurmountable. As the next few days passed, Sarah spent more time observing the cafe's flow. She watched the staff during the rush hours, looking for any bottlenecks or inefficiencies. She started having more conversations with her team about ways to improve the customer experience without sacrificing the quality of the product. And slowly, she began to realize that growth wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. Sarah knew she couldn't do it alone, and that was okay. She needed a solid plan to expand, but she also needed a team that was just as committed to the cafe's vision as she was. That meant being open to new ideas and trusting others with responsibilities that were once solely hers. One afternoon, as Sarah was taking inventory, she noticed a familiar face walk through the door. It was Nathan again, but this time he wasn't alone. He was with a woman Sarah had never seen before. She had a warm, friendly smile, and she looked like she was ready to get to work. Nathan spotted Sarah and walked over to her with the woman in tow. "Hey, Sarah. This is Rebecca. She's got a ton of experience managing cafes and restaurants. I think she could be a great addition to the team. I've already talked to her about helping out with organizing things and managing the front of the house." Rebecca extended her hand with a smile. "It's great to meet you, Sarah. I've heard a lot about your place, and I'm excited to be a part of it." Sarah's mind immediately began racing. Hiring Rebecca could be the first step in making the cafe more efficient, but was she ready to hand over some control? Could she trust someone else to help manage this dream she had built from the ground up? She glanced over at Nathan, who gave her a reassuring look. "We can't do this alone," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "It's time to bring in some help. You don't have to do everything by yourself." Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded. This was it. The next step. It was time to grow, not just the cafe, but herself. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Rebecca worked together to streamline the cafe's operations. Rebecca brought a wealth of experience, and soon enough, Sarah realized that the cafe was becoming more organized and efficient than ever. The chaos of the early days was starting to feel like a distant memory. But growth wasn't just about expanding the cafe, it was about Sarah herself evolving as a leader. She was learning how to trust others, how to delegate, and how to find a balance between running the business and staying true to her vision. Every day brought new challenges, but with each challenge, Sarah grew more confident in her ability to navigate the journey ahead. As Sarah sat at the counter one quiet evening, looking around at the cafe, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It wasn't perfect, and there was still so much to learn, but it was hers. And she was ready for whatever came next. It was a week after Sarah had hired Rebecca, and things were starting to take shape in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. The cafe was running smoothly, thanks to Rebecca's sharp organizational skills, and Sarah was finally able to step back from the day-to-day operations just a little. With the pressure easing, she found herself with more time to focus on her own growth as a business owner, and maybe even a little space to breathe. It was a Saturday morning, and Sarah was at the counter, her coffee in hand, when a young woman walked through the door. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail and a slight nervousness in her eyes. She approached the counter slowly, almost cautiously, and Sarah glanced up from her laptop, offering a warm smile. "Good morning," Sarah said. "How can I help you today?" The young woman hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice soft but clear. I'm interested in working here. I've been coming by for the past week, and I really love this place. It's got a good vibe. I was wondering if you're hiring. Sarah paused for a moment, surprised by the question. The cafe had grown rapidly, and though they had hired Rebecca recently, they had yet to actively advertise job openings. Still, there was something about this young woman, her earnestness, her passion, that struck Sarah as something worth considering. She wasn't just another applicant, there was something in her eyes that said she truly wanted to be a part of the team. We actually are looking for a bit of extra help, Sarah replied. Are you in the area often? The young woman nodded quickly. Yes, I live just a few blocks away. I'm currently in school, but I've been looking for something part-time. I love coffee and working with people. I'd love to help out here if I can. Sarah considered it for a moment. She had been feeling the weight of running the cafe with just a small team, and the idea of someone passionate about coffee and customer service joining the staff seemed like a perfect fit. Plus, the cafe was only growing busier by the day. Well, I think you'd be a great addition, Sarah said, her tone welcoming. Why don't you stop by tomorrow, and we can talk about the details? The young woman's face lit up with a grateful smile. Thank you. I'll be here tomorrow for sure. The next day, Sarah met with the young woman, whose name was Lily. She had a bright energy about her, and after a short conversation, Sarah decided to offer her a part-time position as a barista. The decision felt right, and it wasn't long before Lily fit into the cafe's rhythm, her warmth and enthusiasm radiating through every interaction with customers. As the weeks went on, Sarah began to notice something remarkable. The cafe wasn't just a place to grab a cup of coffee or a pastry, it was becoming a community. More and more people were finding their way in, not just for the food, but for the atmosphere, the camaraderie, and the sense of belonging it offered. She could see it clearly in the regular customers. They weren't just coming for the cappuccinos and croissants anymore, they were coming for the feeling of connection. Some of them stayed for hours, working on their laptops or chatting with friends, while others simply sat in silence, savoring the peace the cafe provided. It was exactly what Sarah had dreamed of when she first opened the cafe, a space where people could slow down and enjoy the simple pleasures of life, whether it was a warm cup of coffee or a genuine conversation. But there was more. The ripple effect of her success was beginning to spread beyond just the cafe itself. One afternoon, as Sarah was cleaning up after a busy lunch rush, a familiar face entered the cafe. It was Karen, the woman who had first introduced Sarah to the idea of running her own business. They had met years ago through a mutual friend, and though their interactions had been few and far between since then, Karen had always kept in touch, offering advice when Sarah needed it most. Sarah! Karen exclaimed with a warm smile as she walked up to the counter. It's been far too long. Sarah returned the smile, feeling a sense of comfort in seeing a familiar face. Karen! It's so good to see you. How have you been? I've been great, Karen said, taking a seat at the counter. I heard about your cafe, and I couldn't resist stopping by. I have to say, it's everything you said it would be. It's wonderful. Sarah felt a rush of gratitude at the compliment. Thank you. I've been working really hard to make it everything I imagined, but there have been a lot of challenges along the way. Karen raised an eyebrow knowingly. That's what I expected. But I can tell you're on the right path. You've got something special here, Sarah. They chatted for a while about the cafe and everything Sarah had learned since opening. The conversation naturally turned to the bigger picture, Sarah's dreams, her goals, and what came next. I've been thinking a lot about expansion, Sarah admitted. We're growing fast, and I'm not sure if I'm ready for the next step. I mean, everything feels like it's working, but I'm not sure how to take it to the next level without losing the essence of what makes this place so special. Karen took a slow sip of her coffee, considering Sarah's words. It's normal to feel that way. The growing pains are part of the process. But if you're ready to grow, it's time to start thinking about how you'll expand without compromising your core values. Your cafe has a soul, Sarah. You just need to protect that as you grow. Sarah felt a flicker of inspiration ignite within her. Karen's words were exactly what she needed to hear. It wasn't about rushing into expansion, it was about being intentional, finding the right balance between growth and maintaining what made the cafe unique. That night, as Sarah sat in the quiet of the cafe, reflecting on her conversation with Karen, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The next step wouldn't be easy, but she had the tools to navigate it. With Rebecca's help, the addition of Lily to the team, and her own vision for the future, Sarah knew that she could scale her dream without losing the heart of the cafe. She wasn't just building a business, she was building a community, a place where people could connect, share stories, and find a moment of peace in their busy lives. And that, she realized, was something worth protecting. The days that followed Karen's visit were a whirlwind of planning and decision-making. Sarah had always been the type of person who thrived on hard work and dedication, but now she was facing something that required a different kind of effort. The pressure of growing the cafe was no longer just about serving good coffee, it was about making strategic choices that could shape the future of everything she had built. Rebecca had been instrumental in helping streamline operations, but the growth that Sarah was witnessing in the cafe was beginning to test the limits of their capacity. As the customer flow continued to increase, the small team struggled to keep up with the demand. The cafe was constantly packed during peak hours, and Sarah had started to realize that they were pushing the boundaries of what their current space and resources could handle. One morning, as Sarah walked into the cafe and surveyed the bustling atmosphere, she felt the weight of it all settle on her shoulders. She'd always imagined this kind of success, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to handle it. "Morning, Sarah." Lily called out, beaming as she handed a cappuccino to a waiting customer. "Good morning, Lily," Sarah replied, her voice faintly distracted. Sarah made her way to the back of the cafe where Rebecca was reviewing inventory. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone was working hard, but it felt like they were always on the edge of being overwhelmed. Rebecca looked up and smiled as Sarah walked in. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, noticing the concerned look on Sarah's face. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted, leaning against the counter. "I'm starting to feel like we're outgrowing this space. It's getting harder to keep up with demand. We don't have enough room, and I'm not sure what the next step is." Rebecca nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "I know what you mean. I've been thinking the same thing. It's exciting, though, right? I mean, we're definitely onto something special here, but we can't ignore the fact that we're at a crossroads. We need to either expand or figure out how to scale without losing what makes this place unique." Sarah had been wrestling with that very dilemma. The idea of expanding was both thrilling and terrifying. The cafe was her heart and soul, and she didn't want to compromise its charm or the intimate, cozy feeling it provided. But at the same time, the demand was undeniable. People loved the space, loved the coffee, loved the atmosphere. It was hard to ignore the momentum, the potential for something bigger. "I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think it might be time to look into expanding," Sarah said, her voice low. "But I don't want to lose what makes this place special. How do we expand without losing that magic?" Rebecca took a deep breath, considering the question carefully. "I think it starts with the people. You've got an amazing team here, Sarah. If we bring in more staff and keep the same attention to detail, we can keep the spirit of the cafe intact. We just need to be strategic, maybe even look at a second location or see if we can upgrade the space here." Sarah nodded, feeling a little more reassured. Rebecca's words made sense. If they were going to grow, they needed to be deliberate, careful in how they approached expansion. She didn't want to make decisions out of fear or greed, she wanted to make sure the expansion was true to the heart of what they had already built. "Let's start small, then," Sarah said, her resolve growing stronger. "We'll look into optimizing this space first. And I'll start researching potential locations for a second cafe, but we'll take it slow. We can't rush this. We have to keep it true to who we are. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, planning, and strategic decisions. Sarah found herself reaching out to local business owners who had gone through the expansion process, gathering advice and insights about how to grow sustainably. Rebecca and Lily were on board with the vision, and they worked together to ensure the cafe's culture and values stayed intact, no matter how big they got. Sarah also reached out to her sister, Jessica, for advice. Jessica had been through the grind of starting a business, and though her company was in a completely different field, her experience with the challenges of expansion was invaluable. "I've been thinking a lot about your cafe," Jessica said over the phone one evening. "And I think you're on the right track. But you have to be prepared for the fact that it's going to take more than just physical space. The growth isn't just about getting bigger, it's about becoming a stronger version of what you already are." "I get that," Sarah replied, running her fingers through her hair. "But what if I mess it up? What if I lose the sense of intimacy that's made this place so special?" Jessica paused, and Sarah could hear the sound of her sister's voice growing more serious. "Sarah, the intimacy doesn't come from the size of the cafe, it comes from the experience you create for people. Focus on that. If you lose sight of why you started this in the first place, that's when it'll be easy to mess it up. But if you stay true to your values and vision, no matter how big you grow, you'll be fine." Sarah sat in silence, absorbing her sister's words. They were simple, but powerful. It wasn't about keeping the cafe small, it was about keeping its essence intact, no matter what shape it took. The first major decision Sarah made was to focus on expanding the menu. She didn't want to change everything, but offering a few new items that aligned with the cafe's vibe seemed like a manageable first step. A new selection of teas, vegan options for baked goods, and a few seasonal drinks would diversify the offerings while keeping the essence of what people loved. Then, with the guidance of Rebecca, they started to restructure the layout of the cafe. They reworked the flow of the kitchen, created more seating options in the back, and opened up a small corner for local artists to display their work, creating an even more welcoming space for customers to gather and connect. But even as Sarah worked tirelessly on improving the cafe's physical space and expanding the menu, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something bigger on the horizon. She knew that the next few months were going to be pivotal in determining what kind of business she was going to build. Expansion was inevitable, but how far she wanted to take it was still unclear. One morning, as Sarah stood behind the counter preparing for the day's rush, Nathan walked in, a curious look on his face. "I've been hearing a lot about you lately," he said with a half smile. "People are talking. It seems like you've got a good thing going here." Sarah paused, looking up from the espresso machine. "Thanks. We've been working hard to make it something special." Nathan's gaze turned serious. "It's working, Sarah. People love it. But you know, there's a big opportunity here. I know you're focused on the cafe, but what if this wasn't the only one? What if we opened more locations?" Sarah looked at him, her heart pounding. The idea was thrilling and terrifying at once. Opening more cafes could be the answer to everything she'd been striving for, but it could also be the beginning of a whole new set of challenges. The moment had come. This was her fork in the road. The morning after Nathan's offer, Sarah woke up with a head full of questions and a heart full of uncertainty. The weight of the decision she now faced was more significant than anything she had encountered so far. For months, the cafe had been a place of solace, creativity, and personal growth. She had poured her heart and soul into it, nurturing not just a business, but a community. But Nathan's words, "What if we opened more locations?" kept echoing in her mind. It was the kind of question every entrepreneur dreams of but fears all the same. The opportunity to grow was right there, clear and undeniable, but the responsibility that came with it was a different beast entirely. Could she handle it? Would expanding the cafe's reach still maintain the same sense of warmth and connection that had made it so special? Sarah sat at her kitchen table, her coffee growing cold as she mulled over her options. She could envision the success of expanding, growing into new neighborhoods, and maybe even cities. But with that success came challenges she couldn't ignore. The heart of her business, the cafe's intimate, community-centered vibe, would be put to the test. Could she replicate that magic in new locations? And what would it mean for her current team? Would they still be able to maintain the close-knit, family-like atmosphere? The cafe had been Sarah's dream, and she wasn't willing to compromise its soul for the sake of growth. But maybe there was a way to balance both, to grow the business while staying true to its roots. She needed clarity, and there was only one place she knew she could go to find it. That afternoon, Sarah called Karen. They had spoken often about the challenges of business ownership, but this was different. This time, Sarah needed advice that could truly change the course of everything. "I don't know what to do," Sarah admitted as soon as Karen answered the phone. "Nathan thinks we should expand. He's got ideas for multiple locations, but I'm scared. I love what we've built, and I don't want to lose it. But I also don't want to miss an opportunity." Karen's voice was steady, the calm she always seemed to bring settling over Sarah. "Sarah, I know what you're feeling. It's terrifying, isn't it? The idea of expanding. But here's the thing, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You've built something special. Now, it's time to decide how you want to share it with the world. Just because you open more locations doesn't mean you lose your authenticity. But you have to be intentional about it." "I just don't know if I can handle it," Sarah said, her words feeling heavy. "I mean, what if I fail? What if I lose control of what this cafe stands for?" Karen took a deep breath. "You're not alone in this. You've got a team now. Look at Rebecca, look at Lily, they're loyal to you, to the vision you've created. You've built a community, and they believe in it just as much as you do. Surround yourself with people who get what you're trying to do. The key is to maintain that sense of community, no matter where you open. That's how you scale while staying true to your roots." Sarah felt a spark of hope ignite within her. She wasn't alone in this. She had people who believed in her, who had witnessed the growth of the cafe from the inside out. Maybe, just maybe, she could make it work. "I think you're right," Sarah said, her voice firming with resolve. "It's not about abandoning the essence of what we've built. It's about finding a way to share it in a way that feels authentic. But it's going to take more planning, more careful thought." Karen laughed gently. "Of course it will. But you've got this. You're more than capable, Sarah. Trust yourself." As the days passed, Sarah threw herself into her work with renewed vigor. She called in a business consultant, someone with experience in the restaurant industry, to help her evaluate her options for expansion. She started to research different locations, each with its own unique challenges. But what became clear to Sarah during this process was that she wasn't just looking for a location, she was searching for the right kind of people, people who would carry forward the spirit of the cafe, no matter where they were. She spent hours with Rebecca and Lily, talking through every possible scenario. What would it look like to replicate the cafe's atmosphere in another location? How could they maintain the personal connections with customers, even in a bigger space? Every question led to more brainstorming, more planning, and eventually, a clear path forward. Sarah's first step was to secure a second location in a nearby neighborhood, one that was just beginning to see an influx of young professionals and families. It was a perfect fit for what the cafe had become, a place of comfort, community, and connection. The new location would have the same cozy, intimate vibe, with familiar elements like reclaimed wood furniture, soft lighting, and a menu that would offer a few new surprises but stay true to what had made the original cafe so beloved. Opening the second location was a slow and steady process, but when the doors finally opened, it felt like a dream come true. The familiar faces from the original cafe stopped by to show their support, and new faces appeared, eager to experience what had made the original location so beloved. The first few weeks were chaotic, filled with unexpected challenges and growing pains, but Sarah could see that they were on the right track. The second cafe was every bit as welcoming and vibrant as the first. As Sarah stood behind the counter one morning, watching the steady stream of customers enter, she realized something: this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The cafe was no longer just her dream, it was a shared dream, one that belonged to everyone who had walked through its doors. And as Sarah looked around, she knew that no matter how far they went, they would always stay true to the heart of what made this cafe unique. The road ahead was long, but it was full of possibility. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt ready for it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?